Welcome to Grounded, Not Divided, a podcast about leaders who are getting important things done in the real world. I'm Matt Burgess. My guests on this show all have hard-won, real-world experiences. Experiences that shed light rather than heat on society's most vital issues. To combat today's political polarization and violence, a distinguished group of Wyoming faith, business, and community leaders recently launched the Become a Peacemaker initiative, calling Christians to restore grace in public life. In the biblical Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." My guest on today's episode is Become a Peacemaker board member Ron Rabou. In addition to his work on Become a Peacemaker, Ron Rabou is president and CEO of Rabou Farms. He's a noted public speaker, and he's author of Keep It Simple, the 12 core values that lead to personal and professional success, and Make Your Own Way, one family's story of breaking the mold and achieving independence in American agriculture. We discuss the Become a Peacemaker initiative, its connection to the biblical concept of grace, and the challenge of political polarization in America and Wyoming. Ron Rabou, welcome to Grounded Not Divided.
Thanks very much. I'm very glad to be here.
I'm really glad to have you here too. Political polarization is something that I think about a lot. It's disrupting it is one of the main motivations for this podcast. And in particular, disrupting it by highlighting stories of people who are making a difference on the ground, as opposed to let's just talk to whatever talking head is saying the divisive thing on this side or that side of some issue. So I'm really excited about what you're doing and great to have you here.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that we're in a place in this country, we started this organization before everything happened over the last couple of weeks, and we're planning to launch it the beginning of the year. But considering everything that took place, we just felt like the time was now.
Tell me about you just a little bit so people understand where you're coming from. You run a farm?
Yeah, sure. So I am a fifth generation Wyomingite. Actually, my family moved here in 1876.
Wow.
And I grew up on a cattle ranch in southeastern Wyoming, just 50 miles northeast of Cheyenne. And that's kind of the world that I knew. And, you woke up every day and you went out and you fixed fence and you moved cows and you fed cows. And then the next day you did the same thing. And then, the remaining 5 days or 6 days of the week, then that's what you continued to do. And so I grew up with a very strong relationship with my parents and with my sister. We were living actually in what I affectionately call, of course, a compound, which is these conglomerations where everyone throws a house on top of each other and they call it a ranch. And so that's the world that I grew up in. It was my dad and his two cousins, my aunt, and my grandparents. And so my great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandmother actually started the ranch, homesteaded in the early 1900s out here near the community of Albin. And, being a male who grew up in a ranching or production ag background, then you just kind of figure that no matter what course what path your life was going to take you down, that eventually I'm going to end up a rancher. And what happened is my parents, my mom is from Connecticut. My parents really encouraged my sister and I to get an education. My sister went to Hastings College. I went to the University of Wyoming. We both have bachelor's degrees. And my dad was actually the first generation that had ever graduated from college, and that was also from the College of Ag at the University of Wyoming. And when I was in my mid-20s, I was home helping my dad and his partners move cattle. My dad was extremely healthy, but collapsed. I gave him CPR, and he passed away. And it completely changed my life. It put me down a path that I never expected. It put me in a place that I never wanted to be, and that was a place that I found myself living with extended relatives. And there was a lot of dissension there, and I think that dissension was always really in the background because my dad was really, really good at making sure that everyone got along. And so I found myself in this very uncomfortable position. Ultimately, ended up leaving the ranching operation, and my wife and I ventured out on our own to build the farm that we have today. And so we have a organic farm in southeastern Wyoming. We don't have any irrigation. It's all dry land production. We raise a lot of crops that people don't raise in Wyoming. Some of those being lentils or hemp for grain or chickpeas or flax, crops like that. We obviously raise wheat as well. We have a small cattle operation. And as a result of everything that's happened and everything that we've kind of gone through with our ranching operation or our farming operation, but the family ranching operation, it led me into the world of consulting and speaking. I've written a couple of books. My latest one is called Make Your Own Way, and it really is about our story and our journey in American agriculture and how we created and reinvented ourselves and who we were and what we were doing and why we were actually doing it. And really when I began to write more and I began to speak, then I really had to, you have to get there's a certain level of introspection that you have to go through, right? To be able to, because I'm not a guy that just wants to just speak about something that I learned about on the internet. Like, well, what I want to do is I pride myself in speaking about my life and about my life stories and about my experiences and the knowledge that I've gained and the mistakes that I've made, the failures that I've had, and trying to reach out to people to provide a message of hope and provide a message of faith. Because as I began to look introspectively, then I began to realize that, the common ground for everything that I had been through in my life, and I haven't even skimmed the details, but the common ground that I found myself always going back to is my faith. That it has always been everything to me, regardless of whether I recognized it at the time or not. It was always there, and that invisible, quote unquote, so to speak, guidance was always present in my life, even though I might not have been completely aware of it. And I tell people all the time that my wife and I, who have been extremely blessed to have three amazing boys, we haven't always made the right decisions because we're humans, right? So we can't possibly make all the right decisions all the time in every way. But what I have discovered in my life, that every decision that we have made, that the Lord has figured out a way to make those decisions right. And so, I think that the lesson for me was not just the faith piece, but faith is really not active as much when you don't put action behind it. Like you have to make decisions. You have to experience things that you don't want to experience in order for that journey of faith to build and to grow and to become more than what it is today. And I have seen that in my own life and have grown as a result of that. So here I am today, right? So grew up on a cattle ranch, now a small grain farmer. We work with processors, buyers, consumers all over the place, all over the country, and have been able to find my way into the speaking circuit and into the writing circuit, and have really, really enjoyed that. And it's really given me an opportunity to really share a voice. And I hope that it's always a voice of reason, and a voice that is reflective of who I am and what I believe.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that, and what a cool story. Before we talk about the specific initiative, Become a Peacemaker, I want to ask you about grace. As we talked about before we got on the air, I've read the Bible. I went to Catholic school, but not all of our listeners are going to be Christians or practicing Christians. And from what I gather, the concept of grace in Christianity is really important to what you're doing. So could you give a short explanation of what that is, just for our audience? And then I'll ask you about Become a Peacemaker.
It's a great question. Grace is really what the Lord has given us through Jesus. I hear all the time that what people say is so and so deserved this and so deserved that. And the fact of the matter is that if we all got what we deserved, we'd all go to hell. And the Lord is merciful enough that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to die for us in our place. And that is what grace is all about. So it's really, I guess I could liken it to this. There's justice, right? So you go to a store and you steal something and you get caught, and you go to court and the judge says, well, you get a month in jail. Like, that's justice, right? Now, mercy would be a step further, and mercy would be where you steal something, you get caught, the judge gives you a month's sentence, and then in the same breath says, because I think you're a good guy and you didn't really mean to do it, then I'm going to commute your sentence to only 2 weeks, right? That's mercy.
Right.
Grace would be you go into a store, you steal something, the judge, you get convicted, the judge sentences you to 30 days in jail, and someone else steps in your place to serve that sentence for you. And that's what grace is all about. I mean, it encompasses everything that the Christian faith is all about, because we all fall short. We're born into a world of sin that no matter how perfect we try to be, no matter how great we try to live our lives, we fall short of the grace of God. And the only thing that allows us to have eternal life, and the only thing that allows us to be in the presence of God, is grace. And that's what the faith is all about.
That's really great. Thank you so much for explaining that. So now I want to ask you about your Become a Peacemaker initiative. I read about it in the Cowboy State Daily. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's incredibly timely and important. But how did it come about? It sounds like it's been a conversation that's been brewing for a while. How did it come together?
Yeah, so it came together long before all of the incidences that have happened really over the last few weeks or the last few months. The founder of the organization, his name is Matt Michaeli, and Matt's been very politically active over the course of his life, grew up in a very politically active family. And I think, without putting words into Matt's mouth, I think that he was really struggling with, what can we do in this country that brings us back to the foundational principles and brings us back to biblical truths that we all know, but in society we have a tendency to either have forgotten those, or we ignore them, or maybe a little bit of both. And so he had some conversations with some folks that are now on the board. And approached us and said, this is my idea, and what do you think if we do this? And so everyone has hopped on board. We've got a board of 10 members. Matt himself is not on the board, but certainly the founder of the organization. And we have just a really solid group of individuals that are like-minded. And so it's really a nonpartisan, non-denominational group. It's called Become a Peacemaker, and it is really about following the teachings of Jesus, right? Like we have Catholics involved, we have Protestants involved, we have Church of Latter-day Saints involved. But it's the Christian faith as a whole, because we believe as a whole that there are truths in the Bible that are absolutely undisputable, and that the organization is not taking political sides. It's not, obviously, it's a 501c3, so it will not be engaged in political lobbying by law. It can't be. But really, it's about sharing that message of those biblical truths and of those teachings that Christ taught us, and getting society to just take a step back, like take a deep breath. When you feel reactive in whatever situation you find yourself in, take a step back and say, am I responding in the way in which I should? Am I responding with love? Am I responding with what my human nature wants to do, which is to lash back, to argue? Or am I responding with a listening heart and an open mind? And am I responding? And by the way, that doesn't mean that we just roll over and wet ourselves, right? It means that we step up and we speak with conviction. But you can speak with conviction, and you can be convicted in your beliefs without being full of hatred, without being full of anger. You can do that without being rude. You can do it still out of love and be convicted. But I think what we've seen in society is we've seen the extremes either way. We have the people who are so loud and so angry, and so, that is fueled through social media, and it's fueled through the channels in which we communicate a lot of times today. And then you have the other side of the spectrum of that, of people that are just silent. And I hear a lot in private conversations about what people believe and where people think that America needs to head. But where are those conversations in public? And that's what we're saying. We're saying we need to bring those to the forefront. Like stand up for what you believe and be convicted in doing so. And it's okay to live in a society where not everyone agrees on every single point. It's okay to be surrounded by people who have different political views than you do, because we can all learn something from each other. The right isn't correct 100% of the time, and the left isn't correct 100% of the time. But if you look at the news and you look at social media, you are vilified if you don't believe one way or another. And it's time that we publicly say, and not just say, but publicly act in a way that is civil and would honor what Christ has taught us to do, and to just be mindful of that. We need it in our families. We need it in our social circles. We need it in our schools. We need it in our communities. We need it in our local and state and federal politics. We need it everywhere in this world. And if we don't stand up for what's good and for what's right, and if we just continue to be silent as what many of us, frankly, as Christians do, then we deserve what we get in our country. And I don't think that any of us believe as part of this organization that that's where any of us want to head. That we believe that each person really truly can make a difference, and the things that we are doing, the teaching that we are reinforcing, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just talking about things and bringing to the forefront the things that most of us inherently know in the first place.
That's great. You've raised a couple of really interesting points that I want to emphasize. One is that the social media discourse, and to some extent the media discourse in general, reflects a minority of loud voices on the extremes, when actually there's a heck of a lot that Americans agree on across the spectrum on a whole bunch of different issues. So, this episode comes on the heels of 3 that we did about K-12 education. That's a perfect example of parents. Mostly the thing they care about is, are their kids learning to read, and are their kids learning to do math, and a lot of the other stuff kind of underneath that. The second thing you emphasize, which I think is really important, is that being someone who works to reduce polarization and to lower the temperature and to, live your disagreements with grace doesn't mean you can't have opinions. And, we talked about a little bit before we came on the air, Erica Kirk's incredibly moving speech at the Charlie Kirk's Memorial, I think, is a perfect example of that. The last thing I want to emphasize is that you pointed out, it sounds like your organization is founded on the idea that the polarization that we see in our country isn't just inconsistent with the ideals of our country, it's inconsistent with the ideals of the Christian faith. So tell me about what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. How do you disrupt the toxic aspects of our politics on a day-to-day in your organization? Like, what are your plans on the ground?
Yeah, so it's kind of multifold really at this point, and I do believe that this mission will grow over time. But initially, a lot of what we're going to be doing is really professional messaging statewide, and that's going to be through media. A lot of it's going to be on social media. I think that you bring up a very, very good point that social media has a tendency to really divide us in a way like nothing else ever has. We used to all wait for the 5 o'clock news to see what was, the news of the day. And you would wait until you got the newspaper the next day to figure out what went on yesterday. And today there's, because of 24-hour news cycles and social media, instantaneously there's things out there. And a lot of it is not true. A lot of it is not, a good portion of it is not healthy, because I don't think that our minds were created, in a sense, to be able to absorb all of this drama and all of this, the things that happen in the world unfold every last second of every day. But part of the mission of the organization, besides just doing, the getting the message out through that, is really engaging faith leaders and church communities. And we might do that with town halls. We might do that with discussions, seminars, as this begins to unfold, to give people a platform, much like Charlie Kirk was doing, quite frankly, to give people a platform to talk about what they believe. And it doesn't mean that because we all get in a room that we're going to sing Kumbaya and everyone's going to agree with each other. I was always told that when you got married, if you always agreed on everything as a couple together, one of you wasn't necessary. And so you're going to be you're going to have disagreements with people, because we all have different opinions about different things, and that's okay. But at the bottom line, and you just said it, is this. I even talked about this in my first book, which was called Keep It Simple. And I talk about it in my second book. And I talk about it everywhere that I go speak, that as human beings, we are all much more alike than we are different. But we live in a world that teaches us to focus on our differences rather than on the things that bring us together as human beings. And so all of the divisiveness that you see with everything isn't helping to make us a better country. It's not helping. That kind of rhetoric is not helping us to be better fathers. It's not helping us to be better school teachers or better friends or better community members. It's not teaching us to be better servants to other people, which is what, Jesus said, that the greatest among you is those that, the servants, right? He came to serve us. He came to serve us, and we should have that always in our mind as well. But all we want to do is we hear differing things, and then everyone takes sides, and then we forget about the fact of, oh, that guy's my neighbor, and I really used to like him. Well, why did you like him? And what caused that to change? And we see that all over the place. All you have to do is just drive down the road anymore, and someone is going to make a gesture on the road somehow because you weren't going 15 miles over the speed limit like they are. Like the world that we find ourselves in, and I really think this is the crux of a lot of the problem. And I do believe that it's something that our organization will bring to the forefront. I think one of the biggest poisons that we face in this world today is selfishness. That we all want it our way, and we want it our way now. And if our 2-year-olds responded in the way in which we did as adults, what would we do as parents?
The great
but
question.
We're acting like 2-year-olds. We're acting like we're battling it out in junior high school. And that is something that we really need to get a handle on in our society. We need to get a handle on it in our own personal lives. That when I speak with audiences, I talk a lot about servant leadership. And really what that means is this. It's really super simple. God gave you one mouth, 2 ears, and 2 eyes. So that tells me, or what it should tell all of us, is that we should listen and we should observe at least twice as much as we talk. But what we do is we end up spouting off of our mouth, and we forget to listen and we forget to observe. And it's because we're selfish, because we want our way. We're going to be that 2-year-old. We're going to be that junior high student that screams and kicks and hollers until we get our own way. And so by bringing these foundational biblical truths and the foundational teachings of Jesus back to the forefront of our minds, it doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean we're always going to adhere to those, but we at least need to begin to build an awareness of why that's valuable in our society. And so much of what we will be doing is engaging and encouraging Christians to step up and to step in, to remain convicted, but do it in the way in which Christ taught us to do it.
You brought up a couple of really interesting points that I want to follow up on. One of them is the idea that reducing polarization isn't just about talking about the issue that you disagree on to death and then finding some common ground. Often there is some common ground on the issue, but a lot of reducing polarization is about building strong communities and having relationships with your neighbors that have absolutely nothing to do with the issues that polarize us. When you were talking about that, I was reminded of the morning after the 2024 election, all kinds of noise being made online, right, on both sides. And I went to play. I played basketball with a men's group at the rec center at 6 a.m. and then took my kids to school. And I remember thinking, Albany County, where I live, pretty much mirrors the national popular vote in every presidential election. And I remember thinking, as divided as we seem to be, probably half the guys I played with this morning were Democrats and half were Republicans. And probably half the people that I see at my kids' school are Democrats and half are Republicans. And I trust all of them with my kids. And so we're going to be okay. No matter what side you're on. So following up on that idea, to what extent is part of what you're doing about building communities outside of politics, right? Obviously, faith is one way that people can organize that isn't always directly related to politics. But is that part of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so really it is about building communities, because it's about building those relationships and making sure that those, so we all get to the end of our lives and we're lying on our deathbed. What are we going to say the three most important things are in our life? I ask people this question all the time. And it doesn't matter if it's a small audience, large audience, what the audience's backgrounds are, anything. I say, in that instance, give me the three most important things in your life. And I've never had a different answer. And the three most important things always are this: faith, family, and friends. So if those are the most important things that all of us hold dear to our hearts, why are we not paying attention to those important things more than we do? Because in our hearts, we know that faith, family, and friends are the most important thing in our lives. But we spend our time arguing a point with someone or arguing a message with people that we don't know, that we really, at the end of the day, really don't care about because we don't know them. But we spend our time immersing ourselves in that. And the only thing that does is distracts us and pulls us away from those three things that we declare on our deathbed are the most important to us. And so it's a matter of perspective, right? So we have lost our way because we have lost our perspective. That if we can really take a step back and say, what are the most important things in my life? And what am I doing on a daily basis to make sure that my actions are following through with what those three important items are in my life, or that one important item, or those two important items, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, are our actions speaking for who we are as people? Or are we allowing our selfishness and our emotions and our inability to have self-control? Are we allowing those things to dictate our lives and our priorities instead?
Great. So the second thread I want to pull in what you said before is about how often we're united much more than we're divided on things. And you framed it in terms of, divisions within faith communities. But one of the things that was really striking to me in listening to you is that a lot of what you said, reminds me of conversations I've had with, Jewish friends, for example, in the context of polarization, talking about how, dialogue is a big part of the Jewish tradition. Or, even some secular humanists that I know in academia, talking about how the principles of that tradition are really different from the current polarization. And so I guess the two questions I have about that are, do you think that speaks to just something that generally, are there maybe some values and principles that unite Americans, of all different faith backgrounds? And the related question is, do you see your organization as, ever eventually expanding to kind of interfaith with other faith traditions outside of Christianity, or secular humanism, or kind of how do you see the future of your organization, and how it engages with the different parts of the state and the country?
Well, I can tell you that our organization will always be all encompassing for those who want to and have a desire to follow those biblical truths and those truths that Jesus taught us. And I think that, as I mentioned before, those truths then those teachings are undisputable. I mean, they're biblical, they're in the Bible. And that is what we can all go back to. So do we have something in common? Absolutely we do. One of the things we have in common is we're all sinners. Another thing that we have in common is that that we all have the opportunity to read the same book. That the other thing that we have in common is that because we're human beings, a lot of times we have the same wants, needs, and desires. We want to be loved, we want to be cared for, we want to be heard, we want to have the opportunity to express our opinions, we want to be able to have a voice, and we want to have that freedom of expression to do so. Now, the way in which some people do that, some of us would disagree with, but the greatest thing about a free society is that we allow that freedom of expression and that freedom of speech, even though a lot of it may not be something that we agree with. Our free society in America allows us to do that, but we can do that with less anger and less hate toward each other. And I'll pull this out because again, this organization is not a reflection, a direct reflection. I think that it's an indirect reflection of what happened to Charlie Kirk, because we had formed everything long before that. But the point is that I think that his level of popularity was largely driven by the fact that he allowed people to have a voice. So it goes back to the 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth conversation, that he allowed them to speak what they were feeling. And they felt like they had a voice, and he listened. Now, a lot of times he would disagree with that. And I think that he did that with dignity and with respect and with love. And I think that is what people want. And we just have to be mindful of the fact that we're all human beings at the end of the day. Does anyone want to burn America to the ground and burn our communities to the ground? Now, maybe there's some fringes that would like that, but no matter what you threw at them, they wouldn't be happy. But by and large, more than the vast majority, almost everyone wants to be able to express themselves in a way that they feel that they can be heard, but they want to continue to be able to have the freedom to do that. And I think that we can learn to have enough respect for each other and enough exercise our actions with enough civility and enough love, and to be able to reflect that which we believe. So I think a lot of us we just need to be more mindful of the things that many of us know. That when we hear a lot of this stuff, regardless of what political persuasion you are, when we hear a lot of the stuff that's going on out there, we can say to ourselves, that's not right. And that's where we need to be able to step in. And that's what I'm talking about, that we want to be able to teach people that it's okay to step in and step up for your convictions, and make sure that those convictions are centered around those biblical truths and the things that Christ taught us to do, and ways in which he taught us to behave.
You mentioned service a couple of times, which I think is something that I've heard from, people I would consider peacemakers on all sides of the political spectrum. That I think earlier you referred to the opposite posture in politics as akin to a toddler, right? And it reminds me of talking to back when I worked at CU Boulder. I got to give a talk to undergrads about career advice, and one of the things I was saying to them is I sort of took the liberty of giving some life advice too. And one of the things I remember saying was, if you want to make the world a better place, look outward and not inward. If it seems like some people's idea of making the world a better place these days is I'm this, I have these interests. If I help myself and everyone else who shares the same interests that I have, that somehow I'm serving the broader community. Which it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, is different from what you're saying. But so I guess I want to talk about the specifics of service. How do we get, you've alluded to a few times people who have gone down a path of polarization, maybe through social media. Online radicalization is a huge common feature of most, actually, of the shooters that have been in the news recently, committing political violence on both sides in the last year or so. Who are these people that, that are lost and could be called better into service? And how do you find them? And how do you call them in?
I don't necessarily think you find them. I think that, again, our organization is non-denominational, it's nonpartisan. And it's not my job, and it's not our job to, figuratively beat someone silly with a Bible. But our actions speak much louder than our words. And that as human beings, we have a tendency to sometimes have a change of heart. And why do we have that change of heart? And that change of heart may be because we're just in a different place in our life. That it's not up to me to change the way other people think. Through this organization, it's up to me to visibly talk about those things that can bring us together as human beings in a civil way, in a Christ-like way, and that it's not up to my job to change the hearts and minds of people. It's just my job to go out and express my beliefs, and certainly through become a peacemaker through the organization, to talk about those teachings that we've mentioned several times of Christ, and to talk about those, and that people will, some people, not everyone, but some people will begin to pay attention, to sit up and say, I think maybe I'm having a change of heart and I need to change that. I mean, and they may never have that, but it's not up to me to do that. It's up to the Lord to work in those people's lives, to help those hearts and those minds to change. But if I do nothing about it, then I'm really part of the problem, not part of the solution. And what we're presenting here is really to be a part of the solution, and be a part of the solution in bringing people together in a civil manner, to find common ground in these biblical truths and in these teachings of Christ. I think that we spend a lot of time in the world trying to, some of what's wrong is we're constantly trying to change other people's mind, trying to make them think like us. I'm not trying to make anyone think like me at all. that you can believe what you want to believe, but these foundational principles that we are talking about, regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are, or regardless of what your political persuasions are, I think we can all come to the table and agree that those are good for society. Those are good for those of us who live in society, like I said, regardless of whether that's in our families, in our social circles, politically, whatever it is that we do in our jobs, et cetera. That everyone talks about going out and wanting to change the world. So we know that Leo Tolstoy told us everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change himself. And until we can begin to change our own behaviors and our own reactions and our own way in which we respond to the rhetoric and the vitriol that we are faced with on a daily basis, and until we decide that we want to change the way in which we react to those things, and the way in which we and how much we absorb those things, then the world will continue to drift further away from truth. So we have to find it in our own hearts to say, what do I need to do to be part of the solution? What do I need to do to be part of helping to make my community better, my family better, my social circle better? What kind of behaviors do I need to embrace? What kind of, do I need to listen more? Do I need to observe more? Do I need to speak less? Do I need to be more loving? Do I need to be more engaging? What is it that I need to do to play my role in that? And if enough of us can have that mindset, then we really, truly can change the world. Because I think that there's enough of us out there that want to. But I think one thing that is so great about becoming a peacemaker is that it's allowing those of us who feel like we have maybe not had a platform for our voice to be able to say, I want to join a force for good and for right, because I believe that this is how we make our society a better society.
One of the really interesting things that you brought up earlier in the context of Charlie Kirk is how he gave a lot of people who felt like they didn't have a voice. And that's certainly something I've heard from, some of the students on our campus, a few people I know, in fact, off campus who knew him. It also reminds me of something that I've heard both about him and actually about Jordan Peterson, who was, just a normal college professor when I was an undergraduate at University of Toronto before he was famous. That their critics and their followers often are talking about different things. And I think in both of their cases, one of the things that people who like them really talk about is helping young men find meaning. And, for example, there's somebody I know who runs an institute for family studies at University of Virginia who talked about how, Charlie Kirk was sort of the anti-Andrew Tate for some young conservative men, in the sense that he said, his messages were get married, treat your wife well, have kids, right? Be devout, and be spiritual. And I've heard, similar kinds of things about Jordan Peterson, although less specifically about religion. So it's almost like the people who like them and don't like them are talking past each other, right? Talking about different things. And so often divisions in our politics are like that. I wonder to what extent faith communities are actually a useful way for calling people into the conversation, a useful structure for calling people into the conversation about polarization. One of the things that I've done a lot of work around polarization on college campuses and environmental issues and in society, and some, not all of them, have the challenge of, you set up a polarization group, and the 10% of people who are most concerned about polarization and most agree that polarization needs to be reduced are the ones that show up, right? And then it's like, okay, well, are you actually moving the needle, or are you sort of, creating a support group for people who agree that that the needle needs to be moved? Do you see in your faith communities, an opportunity, I guess, to, because you're organizing around how to have better discourse, but also around faith? Does that merger, you think, give you a way maybe to reach more people?
I think it absolutely does. I think that one way or another, most of us have a sense of, you can call it what you want, faith, spirituality, religion, and those are all, those could be different things, but that's semantics, right? So that is one thing that we all have in common. Like I said, when I ask the question to people, what are the three most important things? Faith, family, friends. Faith is always in there. I've never had it not be an answer in any group that I've ever worked with. And I'm not saying that there isn't anyone out there who would completely disagree with that, because that, obviously is a limited sampling. But the fact of the matter is that, again, let's go back to what I talked about before, which is we're all a lot more alike than we are different. And I think that certainly faith is something that helps bring us to, it's something we all have in common. Because think of this, that a lot of times when we have a tragedy, remember 9/11? What did everyone go back to? They went back to their faith. When we have something that happens to a child or to a parent or to a spouse, where do most of us go? We go back to our faith. And whether we believe exactly the same way in which Christians believe isn't the point. The point is that we always go back to something outside of ourselves, because I think we know inherently as people that there is a creator that is better, greater than what we are. And so certainly, I mean, does that help build the community? Of course it does, because it is something that we all go back to. But I think bigger than that, we don't teach our kids as parents. We don't say, well, if you disagree with what your teacher is telling you in school, you tell them where to put it and then go punch them in the face. We don't say that as adults, no matter how crazy we might be, as some adults maybe are. We don't tell our kids to behave in that way. We teach them to be respectful and to listen, and to respect their elders, and to be polite, and to say please, and to say thank you, and to do those kinds of things. We don't intentionally teach our children those opposite ways. So what in the world makes us think as adults that we would want to teach each other to do those things? But that's the world that we find ourselves living in, that, well, if you punched me first, then I'm going to punch back 3 times harder, and then I'm going to bring 5 of my buddies in. That there's no end to that. And what's so brilliant about faith, and what so brilliant about Christ's teachings, is it diffuses all of that.
Let me ask you a specific follow-up about that. And maybe particularly for, well, actually, I think all segments of our audience would be interested in that, whether they're, already devout, or have a more complicated Christian faith journey, or a part of some other spiritual group, or are non-religious. I think a lot of people have heard of, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, right? That was the first thing I thought of when I saw the name of your group. Are there other specific passages or teachings in the Bible that you and your colleagues find especially um, pertinent to what you're doing here? That that you, I guess what I'm really getting at is, other people who are Christians or who have a Bible, what are the specific teachings that you think are most, that you would point to the most if you had their ears, say, on a podcast?
I can't. Our organization is new enough that as we continue to grow and continue to gel together as a group, we'll continue to have more of these conversations. What I can tell you is there is not one part in the Bible that I disagree with personally. I think the Bible is the truth and the whole truth. And while there may be pieces in there that as a human being, I want to adhere more to than others, because that is probably, my sinful and selfish nature, then I need to be mindful that it's all encompassing, right? I think that there are, lots of parables in the Bible, in the New Testament, obviously, that Jesus used, that are extremely important to how we can live as human beings today. I think that we can always go back to the Lord's Prayer. We can always go back to the Ten Commandments. We can go back to those parables that Jesus taught us, and I just think that it's all encompassing. I think that while some of us might say, my favorite verse is the 23rd Psalm, or my favorite verse is John 3:16. I think we all may have our favorite verses, and we all may have things that we pick and choose. But I think what we have to be mindful of, certainly as our group, but certainly those of us individually, is that the Bible is all of the truth. There's nothing absent from it that the Lord has left out. Like, it's all there, but it's up to us as people to dive into His Word, and to not just dive into it and not be able to regurgitate passages and not be able to regurgitate verses or parables or teachings, but to actually embrace those to a point that we internalize those and begin to live and act out on those. And that is what's important, that if we don't internalize all of that and we're just memorizing things and we're just spouting what we memorize, are we really making an impact? Because it's not our words that are going to make a difference. It's the example that we set and the people that we become outwardly as a result of those things that the Bible teaches us.
So for my last question, I want to come back to something you said at the beginning about social media, but I want to apply it to politics. One of the things that makes social media so divisive is that it concentrates and amplifies the most extreme voices among us. And some people would argue that to maybe a little bit of a lesser extent, but still to some extent, politics does that too, right? That the choices that you might get in a primary on both sides in a lot of places might not represent the median voter, the 2/3 majority platform, I like to call it, and some of the, and that extends to political staff, right? Think tanks, like there's this whole world that it kind of exists in parallel on both sides, that maybe selects extreme ideas and extreme voices and counterproductive attitudes into our politics, kind of in the same way that social media invites these things into our discourse. And so suppose that your group is successful in reaching the people of Wyoming, or at the very least the non-denominational Christian community of Wyoming, which is a large majority of the state. Do you also is it also part of your group's mission to try to affect the political process? Obviously not in a partisan way, but in a way that affects the tone of our politics? Or is the hope that if you can reach enough people in enough communities, that democracy will do the rest?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you can change the hearts and the minds of people, everything changes. Our communities change, our schools change, our churches embrace those teachings more. I think politics change. I think everything changes when those hearts and minds change. So the end goal right now is not to say, we're gonna positively, absolutely be relentless until we can change the political situation that we have in our state. But I think that it will be a result of those hearts and those minds changing, because when we turn away from our sinful nature, and when we turn away from our selfishness, and we put our eyes on other people, and we begin to observe and to listen more than we talk, and if we begin to engage others in a way that is respectful and civil and loving, and that when we begin to set that example, I think everything can't help but change as a result of that.
So for a final thought, 5 years from now, suppose that you're successful, however your group defines success. What are things that you can point to that will tell you that you've been successful?
I think one of the obvious things is going to be a reduction in what we currently see in society. That when we can begin to have respectful discussions with each other, when we can begin to spend less of our time on social media. And it's really easy, as anyone can hide in their dark bedroom and say all kinds of hateful things and throw it out to the rest of the world. We need less of that. And I think that, like I said, going back to the previous question, is I think that when the hearts and minds of people change, societies change, and movements as a result in those societies will change. Will there still be discourse? Will there still be disagreements? Will there still be differing opinions? Of course there will be, and there should be, because I think that is healthy to a republic. And so we'll know, if nothing else, maybe our families are better. Maybe our social circles are better. Maybe, just maybe, people who have, in fact, I think you've seen it already. I really do. So the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle featured a story last week about guys from different sides of the political spectrum sitting down and saying, look, let's have some pizza together. That's a change. That's a move in the right direction. So it's already making a difference. And I'm not saying that was a direct result of become a peacemaker, but what I am saying is that was a direct result of what become a peacemaker represents. Okay, because we're seeing that all over in our society. Look, in the last 2 weeks, the attendance at churches of all faiths around the country have skyrocketed. I mean, what a beautiful thing. What a wonderful thing. And because people are rallying behind this, because we know, like I said, we know inherently as human beings what's good, what's right, and what we need to do. We just need to be more mindful of it on a daily basis in everything that we do, in everything that we're involved with, and in all interactions and all relationships that we have in our lives.
Yeah, I really like that story of the people getting pizza together. It reminds me of last week we had a panel discussion here on how do we find an off-ramp, inspired by Governor Cox from Utah's statement. And we had the president of the university, the provost of the university, the head of the Turning Point USA chapter, the vice president of the College Democrats, and the head of the Bridge USA chapter. And boy, were our student leaders amazing. You know, totally dispels any idea that the kids aren't all right, right? At least if you're paying attention to the leaders. Well, Ron Rabou, thanks so much for coming on Grounded Not Divided. I really hope that your initiative succeeds. I think it's a really important problem that you're working on. And I think that your approach is one that is going to find a lot of support in our state. And I think, and I hope it's going to make a difference. So thanks so much for what you're doing. And thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Matt, it's been a total joy being able to talk with you and share our message. If people want to know more about Become a Peacemaker, they can go to becomepeacemakers.org. They can sign up there and join the cause. We would love to have as many people involved. We've since we launched last week, we've just had a tremendous response. It's been exciting to see, but outside of Become a Peacemaker, the response that we've seen all over our country is just like, the story that you just cited. What a wonderful example of the fact that we know these things, and we've just had to take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, look, we all are a lot more alike than we are different, even though we have differences, which is okay. Let's focus on those things that bring us together. So, Matt, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Grounded Not Divided. If you want to hear more episodes like this, be sure to subscribe for free on Apple, Spotify, or on the Guided Civic Revival Substack. You can also email us feedback at matt.burgess@uwyo.edu. See you next time.